During my last year or so, I've a couple of times mentioned this person, Daniel Defoe, who was a spy for England in the year and a half prior to the Treaty of Union in 1707 with England. He was quite the lad and quite an entrepreneur, but he was a yo-yo man up and down. But he was obviously hard work, quite bright. So this 10-minute video, which may or may not have interest for many people, is the notes I found due to personal interest because I'd mentioned him previously. They don't know when he was actually born. It could have been a couple of years either side of 1660, but they know when he died. He was a prolific English writer. He was a merchant, which they called trades managers in those days, and a spy for England. He was born in an area on the outside of London at that time called Cripplegate, from a Flemish family. His father had a factory making candles. His name was Defoe, but at one of the trips in his past he hid in France for a while to escape his creditors, and at that time he changed his name to the spelling we know, Defoe. He was educated a Presbyterian, which comes from the Flemish area and Europe at that time. But England was still going strong on the Church of England after Henry VIII, so he was a dissenter because he went to churches that weren't actually the Church of England. This actually in England held him back a little from his career. He married Mary Tuffley in 1684, and he got a dowry from Mary's parents of £3,700, which at today's value is nearly £770,000, a huge amount by the standards of the day. In his life, he often had debts. He ended in prison for that. And he was an up and down person, money, not money. But he still stuck to his marriage, and he lived with Mary for 47 years, and they both had 8 children. That was the church he was married at. As a businessman, he had tried a whole range of companies: hosiery, woolen goods, brickworks, perfume, wine. He had great ambition. At one time he was wealthy enough to own a country estate and a ship, but he was rarely out of debt. He kept building goods up and then losing it. In terms of writing, in his life we know of 545 titles, which includes books, pamphlets, political and religious information, and satirical poems. On the right here you can see, after his time in Scotland as a spy, he wrote a book in 1709 called The History of the Union, The View from England. He also wrote Robinson Crusoe in 1719. It was really the first book in the Western world that was popular in more than one country, and it got translated into quite a few different languages, and it's well known today. Defoe, the writer of Robinson Crusoe. In 1703, he was done for libel and a trial at the Old Bailey, and he was sentenced to 3 days on the pillory so that people could throw stuff at him. And he went to prison, the debtor's prison, for a fine of £336, and he wasn't allowed to get out until it was paid. That's 70-odd thousand at today's value. If you haven't got it, the future looks grim. He was bankrupt nearly at the time. During his imprisonment, he wrote to William Paterson. He was a Scot living in England, and he created, after 1707, the Bank of England. He also set up the Bank of Scotland. He was an instigator of the Darien scheme. Paterson had the confidence of Robert Harley, who was an Earl of Oxford and the government's main spy master at that time. So Harley brokered his release, cleared his debts, gave him some money to act for him in England. His job initially was to write a regular review to the people of influence in England to try and sell the idea of a union with Scotland. He claimed many things in these pamphlets, but one of them was, he said, that the Treasury would have an inexhaustible treasury of men, a valuable new market increasing power for England. He was actually quite right, because the colony of Scotland, they forced through poverty and the clearances 4.5 million Scots to leave Scotland to man the empire. That changed, that amount of people going overseas did not happen in England. So he was seeing the future. And then in 1706, Harley, the spy master, sent Defoe to Edinburgh to try and get the people in Parliament and the head people in Scotland to back the Union and vote for the Union. There's many books written by many people about Defoe. That's why we know so much about what he wrote and what he did. This is an example of such a book about Defoe's life. His first reports in 1706 to Harley talked about a Scots rabble as the worst of its kind. And he was frightened of being lynched if they found out that he was English. This was over a year before the Treaty of Union, and people in Scotland were rebelling in all the main cities. And yet they tell us it was a voluntary union today. Defoe was a Presbyterian, although he suffered in England because he wasn't a supporter of the Church of England. Scotland was a Presbyterian country, so he was readily accepted by the Church of Scotland, and he had access through those links to the Parliament of Scotland, and he did a lot of work pretending he had the favour of Scotland and the views of Scotland for the people he talked to, and he tried to sell the Union. He even tried to make sure that they told lies about what would happen with customs and excise and so on, and they were lies. But he was obviously a good talker, a good listener, and a good manipulator. He didn't use the arguments that he did when he was in London writing to get support for the Union in England. He used different arguments, but he didn't tell the Scottish people that the Constitution of England, where the Parliament was sovereign, was totally alien to the Scottish one, where the people was sovereign. That truth was hidden. Most people didn't understand. But when it was finished and the union took place, he got very little reward. His reward was he wasn't in prison. Years later, in 1726, he wrote a book called My Tour Through the Islands of Great Britain, and he admitted in that book that the promised increase in trade and benefits for the population of Scotland that he predicted with the Union was not the case, but rather the contrary. So in 1726, he admitted in writing that his promises and things he said about the benefits of the Union for Scotland was a total lie. Scotland had become a colony in 1708. He died in 1731, not far from where he was born. He was hiding, they believe, from his creditors. They believe he died from a stroke, which is what they called lethargy at the time. And he was buried in Islington, and there's a monument there now. He also has a street named after him in the Bronx area of New York. So that's a brief summary of his life. Before I finish, I noticed in the general election of 2024 for the Westminster Parliament, a letter in the Aberdeen Press and Journal newspaper, and I have it here because it mentions Daniel Defoe, obviously written by somebody who supported Scottish independence, but it's here because of Daniel Defoe. So this letter says, the election leaflets coming through my door from the Conservative and Unionist Party in particular reveal an obsession with stopping the SNP and preventing independence. There is little attempt to explain why the UK is a good thing, nor indeed why the European Union is a bad thing. We mustn't talk about the latter, of course, but a little reflective on how the former happened would be helpful. Most will know that Daniel Defoe as an author of the book Robinson Crusoe, but how many Scots know he was released from prison and sent to Scotland by the English government in 1706 to act as a spy and a fifth columnist? There, the very skills that resulted in his imprisonment were to prove extremely useful. His brief was to befriend those with power and influence and who might take a bribe. He was promoting the supposed advantage of a political union with England, while sending regular reports to his paymasters with a different spin completely. His methods are still widely used today by our predominantly right-wing media, except he was very much more skilled. Truly, he was a master of fake news. Having succeeded in his mission, he wrote, the Scots will be allowed to send to Westminster a handful of men who will make no weight whatsoever. They will be allowed to sit there for form's sake and be laughed at. Something that is just as true today as it was in 1707. All branches of the Unionist parties in Scotland today want this joke to continue. The question you must ask yourself on July the 4th is, to you. So that's the end of my talk. I hope you found it informative about a person that you may know that wrote Robinson Crusoe, but nothing else in his life. Thank you. Before you go, the name at the top is my YouTube channel. Be great if you could subscribe. If you go into YouTube and type this in the search bar at the top, you'll find all my videos, or you can key in the specific video written as it's listed here. I've identified these videos I want to create. This list changes all the time. My next video will be very short as well about monarchy, a future question, and then I'm going to do a longer video on an independent Scottish currency. Thanks very much for listening to this video. Bye for now.